The first time my mother accused me of stealing from our family, she did it in front of 23 people. She waited until my grandfather had finished saying grace. Then she placed a pawn receipt beside my dinner plate and said, very calmly, "Jessica, I think you need to explain why $50,000 worth of my mother's jewelry disappeared 2 days after you visited the house." Every conversation at the table stopped. My grandmother's hand froze around her water glass. My Uncle Joseph leaned back in his chair as though he had been waiting for the show to begin. And my mother smiled at me with the sad, wounded expression she always used when she wanted cruelty to look like concern. I was 29 years old, a junior tax accountant, and until that moment, I believed numbers were the safest things in the world. Numbers did not lie. People did. And the receipt beside my plate was about to prove how far my own family was willing to go to make their lies look real. My name is Jessica Anderson. I grew up in a family where money was never discussed openly, even though it quietly controlled everything. My grandparents, Walter and Evelyn Whitmore, had built their wealth through commercial real estate. They owned shopping plazas, warehouses, and several apartment buildings across the state. They lived comfortably, but they were not flashy people. My grandfather still wore the same watch he had purchased in 1987. My grandmother clipped coupons even though her estate was worth several $1,000,000. Their children were different. My mother, Nancy Whitmore Anderson, believed wealth was only valuable when other people could see it. She bought cars she could barely afford, remodeled rooms that did not need remodeling, and treated every family gathering like a competition she had already decided she deserved to win. Her younger brother, Joseph, was just as bad. Uncle Joseph called himself an entrepreneur. In practice, that meant he started businesses, borrowed money, blamed someone else when they failed, and immediately started another one. For most of my life, my mother and uncle had openly disliked each other. They fought over birthdays, holidays, vacations, and anything involving my grandparents' attention. That was why I initially failed to recognize the possibility that they had started working together. I thought jealousy would keep them divided. I did not understand that greed could make allies out of almost anyone. My grandparents had created an estate trust years earlier. The trust included their properties, investment accounts, and several valuable personal collections. My mother and Joseph were the primary beneficiaries. I had also been included because my grandparents worried my mother would eventually spend everything she inherited. My distribution was supposed to help me purchase a home and build a stable future. I never counted on that money. Still, knowing my grandparents had included me meant something. It felt like proof that they saw me as more than my mother's disappointing daughter. Then my mother placed that pawn receipt beside my plate. The anniversary dinner was being held at my grandparents' house. It was supposed to be a quiet family celebration before their larger 50th anniversary party the following month. My mother said she had discovered the jewelry missing that morning. According to her, she had gone into my grandmother's bedroom to retrieve a necklace for the upcoming celebration. The safe was open. Several velvet cases were empty. The missing pieces included a diamond bracelet, an emerald brooch, a vintage sapphire necklace, and a pair of earrings that had belonged to my great-grandmother. My mother claimed she had found the pawn receipt inside a box in my old bedroom at her house. The receipt listed several jewelry items. It had my name, my address, my driver's license number, and at the bottom, a signature that looked almost exactly like mine. My grandfather picked up the receipt. His face tightened as he studied it. "Did you do this?" he asked. "No," I answered immediately. My mother lowered her eyes. "Jessica, please," she said. "This will only get worse if you keep lying." "I'm not lying. You were at Grandma's house 2 days before the jewelry disappeared." "So were you," my uncle sighed. "That is not helping your case." I turned toward him. I didn't know I was presenting a case. "You should probably start." My grandmother looked at me as though she did not recognize me. That hurt more than anything my mother said. My mother had spent years telling relatives that I was irresponsible. When I changed college majors, she said I lacked direction. When I took an entry-level accounting job, she said I had settled. When I declined to lend her money for a luxury vacation, she told people I had become selfish. She had been preparing the family to doubt me long before she needed them to. The pawn receipt was simply the first piece of physical evidence. My grandfather left the dining room and returned with a folder from his office. He had already spoken to the family attorney. That meant my mother had informed him before dinner. This was not an emotional discovery. It was a presentation. Until the matter was resolved, my grandfather explained, my future trust distributions would be frozen. If the evidence showed I had stolen from the family, I would be removed from the trust permanently. My mother reached for my hand. I pulled it away. "We can get you help," she whispered. That was when I understood the accusation was larger than jewelry. She did not merely want my grandparents angry with me. She wanted them to see me as unstable, dishonest, and dangerous. I stood up from the table. "I'm going to the pawn shop," my mother frowned. "Right now? Yes, it's almost 8. The receipt has an address." My uncle shook his head. "Jessica, storming into a business isn't going to erase your signature." "No. But their records might explain how it got there." For the first time that evening, I saw something change in my mother's face. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. Fear. The pawn shop was still open when I arrived. It sat between a discount furniture store and a closed laundromat in an older shopping center. A metal security gate covered half the front window. Inside, glass cases held watches, tools, guitars, and electronics. The owner introduced himself as Martin. He was in his 60s, with careful eyes and the exhausted patience of someone who had spent decades dealing with desperate people. I placed the receipt on the counter. "I need to know who made this transaction." Martin looked at the receipt, then at me. "If it was your transaction, you already know." It wasn't. He studied my driver's license. The information matched perfectly. I showed him my bank and credit card statements from the date printed on the receipt. I had been working late at my office that evening. There were food delivery charges, parking records, and a time-stamped building entry. Martin listened, but none of it changed his expression. "I can't release customer information without a warrant," he said. "Do you have security footage?" "Not anymore." The transaction had occurred nearly 2 weeks earlier. The camera system automatically erased footage after 24 hours. My first hope disappeared in less than 5 minutes. Then Martin pulled out a thick binder. Every customer who entered the secured appraisal area had to sign in. He turned to the date on the receipt. There was my name, my driver's license number, and my signature. This time, it was not a copy printed onto a receipt. It was written in blue ink on an original page. Someone had walked into that building with my information and signed my name. I stared at the page. "Can I see the rest of the transaction records?" "No. Can you tell me what was sold?" Martin hesitated. Then he turned his computer monitor slightly away from me. "I can tell you this much. We didn't keep the items. Why not? They were outside our usual range. We brokered them through an estate auction company." I felt my pulse quicken. "Which company?" "I can't give you that." I pointed to the receipt. "I'm being accused of felony theft, and I could lose my business license." I understood his position. I also understood that somewhere in his records was the first fact that could clear me, so I stopped arguing and started looking at the numbers. Every pawn transaction had an item identification code. The code appeared on the receipt and in the sign-in ledger. It was not random. The first digits represented the store. The next group appeared to identify the transaction date. The final numbers were likely associated with the receiving vendor. I wrote the code down. I did not have a friend who could magically access every police database, but I had someone better for this problem. My college friend, Marissa, worked as a financial crimes analyst for the county sheriff's office. She could not open a criminal investigation for me. She could tell me whether the identification code resembled anything already documented in a public case file. I sent her a photograph of the receipt. She called me the next morning. "I can't officially help you," she said. "I know, and I'm not giving you confidential information." "I know, but the last section of that item number matches the vendor code used by Briarwood Estate Auctions. The business was located in a neighboring city, about 90 minutes away. I took a personal day from work and drove there. Briarwood operated from a renovated brick warehouse. The front showroom looked more like a museum than an auction house. Antique clocks lined one wall. Silver tea sets gleamed beneath carefully positioned lights. A clerk named Aaron found the transaction after I provided the item number. His expression changed when I showed him my identification. "You weren't the seller," he said. My chest tightened. "Who was?" "I can't give you the customer's name without authorization." I placed the pawn receipt on the counter. "My family is accusing me of stealing these items." He compared the receipt with his screen. "This says the pawn shop accepted the items from you." "They didn't." Aaron looked uncomfortable. He asked me to wait while he spoke to his manager. When he returned, he carried a folder. "We can't provide the full file," he said, "but because you're claiming identity fraud, I can show you enough to confirm that our direct seller was not you." He turned the folder around. The seller listed on the auction consignment agreement was Joseph Whitmore, my uncle. He had not claimed to own the jewelry personally. He had presented a power of attorney document authorizing him to sell property on behalf of my grandmother. The document bore Evelyn Whitmore's signature. I knew immediately it was false. My grandmother signed her name with a sharp, narrow E. The signature on the power of attorney was wide and rounded. It looked like someone's careful imitation of her handwriting. Aaron showed me the inventory photographs. They matched my mother's description of the missing jewelry: the sapphire necklace, the diamond bracelet, the emerald brooch. All of it had passed through the auction house. The jewelry had already been sold to private buyers. I asked how Joseph had been paid. Aaron would not show me the full financial record, but he confirmed the payout had been made by check. I went home and reviewed everything I knew. My mother had access to my old bedroom. She also had an old photocopy of my driver's license from a car insurance application. My uncle had sold the jewelry. Someone had signed my name at the pawn shop, and someone had forged my grandmother's signature on a power of attorney document. The theft was not impulsive. It had required planning, access, and cooperation. That evening, my grandfather called. His voice was formal. "Your mother says you went to the pawn shop and harassed the owner." I asked questions. "She is worried about your behavior." "Did she tell you Joseph sold the jewelry?" There was a long silence. "What are you talking about?" "I saw the auction house documents." My grandfather's voice hardened. "Do not accuse your uncle without proof." "I have proof." "Then give it to the attorney." "I will." My mother called 10 minutes later. "You are making this worse," she said. "For whom?" "For yourself." "Joseph sold Grandma's jewelry." "You sound paranoid." "He used a forged power of attorney." "You have always resented my relationship with your grandparents." I almost laughed. "You accused me of stealing $50,000. Because the evidence points to you." "No, the evidence was arranged to point to me." She became very quiet. Then she said, "Be careful, Jessica. Your grandparents are elderly. Upsetting them unnecessarily could have consequences." It sounded like concern. It was a warning. I contacted a civil attorney named Rebecca Sloan. She specialized in trust disputes and elder financial exploitation. Rebecca told me the pawn receipt alone would not be enough to disinherit me permanently. But if my grandparents believed I had committed theft, they could amend their estate plan. More importantly, if someone was already abusing authority over the trust, time mattered. Rebecca sent a formal preservation request to the auction house. That prevented the company from destroying transaction records. With the threat of litigation, Briarwood released a copy of the payout check to my attorney. The check was made payable to Joseph Whitmore. The endorsement on the back directed the money into an account held jointly by Joseph Whitmore and Nancy Anderson. My mother and uncle had a joint bank account. That one document changed everything. For as long as I could remember, they had pretended to despise each other. Now, I understood why. Their fights created distance. No one would suspect a secret financial partnership between two people who could barely sit together at Thanksgiving. Rebecca recommended that we request a formal trust accounting. Before we could send the demand, my mother called an emergency family intervention. She told my grandparents that I was spiraling. She claimed my visit to the pawn shop, the auction house, and the attorney were signs of a severe psychological episode. When I arrived at my grandparents' home, my mother, uncle, and the family attorney were already seated in the living room. A folder sat on the coffee table. My mother looked exhausted and heartbroken. It was another performance. "Jessica," she began, "we love you." "No, you don't." My grandmother flinched. My mother opened the folder. Inside were medical records from a clinic I had never visited. They claimed I had been treated for a gambling addiction. The records described compulsive betting, delusional thinking, financial instability, and a history of blaming relatives for my losses. My name was on every page. So was my date of birth. The documents even listed a therapist. My grandfather looked at me with deep disappointment. "Why didn't you tell us you needed help?" "Because these records are fake." My uncle leaned forward. "Everything is fake to you, isn't it? The pawn receipt is fake. Grandma's signature is forged. And those medical records are fake." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "This is exactly what the doctor warned us about." I looked at the clinic name. It was located 3 counties away. I had never heard of it. My mother told my grandparents I had invented a conspiracy to cover my gambling debts. She said I had become fixated on the trust because I believed I was entitled to their money. Then she presented a proposed restraining order. It would prohibit me from contacting my grandparents, visiting their property, or interfering with their financial affairs. My grandmother began to cry. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to explain every lie, but I could see that my mother had built the moment carefully. Anything emotional I did would become evidence, so I stood. I looked at my grandparents and said, "Before you sign anything, ask for a complete accounting of your trust." My mother's expression changed again, that same flash of fear. Then she recovered. "Please leave," she said. This time I did. Rebecca investigated the medical clinic. It was real, but the records were not. The therapist listed on the documents had retired 3 years earlier. The provider identification number belonged to a dermatologist. The clinic had no record of treating me. The documents were crude forgeries disguised with official-looking letterhead. But the fake medical records bothered me for another reason. My mother was no longer trying only to disinherit me. She was trying to prevent me from asking questions about the trust. That meant the trust held the real secret. Rebecca filed an emergency petition requesting an independent accounting. At the same time, I began reviewing every financial document I could legally access. My grandparents had occasionally asked me to help organize tax records. I still had copies of several trust statements from previous years. As a junior accountant, I was not a forensic expert. But I knew how to compare balances. 3 years earlier, the trust held millions in liquid investments. The most recent statement my grandfather had shown me listed far less. I had assumed assets had been moved into property or other investments. Now, I looked more carefully. Several transfers had gone to companies with vague names: Whitmore Coastal Holdings, Blue Meridian Development, Solara International Ventures. All 3 companies traced back to my mother and uncle. Rebecca hired a forensic accountant named Malcolm Price. Within 4 days, Malcolm found the outline of the scheme. My mother and uncle had convinced my grandparents to invest in offshore resort developments. They promised luxury properties, guaranteed returns, and favorable tax treatment. The developments either failed or never existed in the form described. Money moved from the trust into holding companies. From the holding companies, it flowed into development accounts. Then portions were transferred into personal accounts controlled by Nancy and Joseph. They had not stolen $50,000. They had lost and diverted millions. The trust was nearly empty. Properties my grandparents believed they still owned had been leveraged as collateral. Investment accounts had been liquidated. Tax payments had been delayed. My mother had framed me because the missing jewelry might have triggered a wider review. If I were branded a thief and removed from the family, no one would listen when I questioned the trust. More importantly, my grandparents would remain dependent on the 2 people exploiting them. The anniversary party was scheduled for the following Saturday. Nearly 100 guests would attend. My mother had rented a private ballroom at a historic hotel. She had arranged flowers, live music, and a slideshow celebrating my grandparents' marriage. She also planned to have them sign several updated estate documents in a private meeting before dinner. Rebecca obtained copies of the proposed documents. They would grant my mother and uncle broad control over my grandparents' remaining assets. They would also authorize future medical and residential decisions. My mother was preparing to control their money and their freedom. We contacted investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit. Because the trust accounting had uncovered evidence of forgery, fraud, and elder exploitation, the case moved quickly. Still, the investigators needed my grandparents to understand what had happened. My mother had isolated them from me. She controlled who visited. She screened calls. She told relatives that I had become dangerous, so I went to the anniversary dinner. I did not sneak inside. I walked through the front entrance with Rebecca, Malcolm, 2 investigators, and a portable case containing certified financial records. My mother saw me before I reached the ballroom. Her face went pale. "You are not welcome here. This is not your anniversary." Security, one of the investigators showed his badge. My mother stopped shouting. For a moment, my grandfather stood from the head table. "Jessica, what is this?" "The accounting I asked you to request." My mother stepped between us. "She is violating the restraining order." "No order was ever issued," Rebecca said. "Only a draft petition was prepared." My Uncle Joseph approached from the other side of the room. He tried to sound calm. "This is a private family event." Malcolm placed 3 binders on the table. "These records concern Walter and Evelyn Whitmore's trust." My grandmother looked at the binders. "What records?" My mother reached for the first one. I moved it away from her. "Grandma, your trust has been drained." The room became silent. My grandfather shook his head. "That's impossible." Malcolm opened the first binder. He explained the transfers. He showed the shell companies. He traced the funds from the trust into the offshore development accounts and then into personal accounts connected to my mother and uncle. My grandfather stared at the pages. My mother began talking over him. "These are fabricated," Malcolm continued. He showed the outstanding loans against the commercial properties. He showed the liquidated investment accounts. He showed the unpaid tax liabilities. My grandmother gripped the edge of the table. "How much is left?" Malcolm answered carefully. "Far less than you were led to believe." My uncle reached for the binder. One of the investigators blocked him. My mother stopped pretending to be calm. She swept the financial ledgers from the table. Pages scattered across the floor. Then she grabbed one of the binders and tore at the plastic sleeves. "You don't know what you're looking at," she shouted. Jessica made all of this? I had never seen my mother lose control in public. Her entire life was built around appearances, but the numbers had cornered her. My grandfather looked at her. "Nancy, what did you do?" "I protected you. You took our money. You would have wasted it." My grandmother stared at her daughter. "It was ours." My mother laughed bitterly. "You were going to leave too much of it to her." She pointed at me. There it was. Not concern, not confusion. Jealousy. My mother had not framed me because she feared being caught. She had framed me because she could not tolerate the idea that my grandparents trusted me. My uncle tried to move toward the exit. An investigator stopped him. My mother turned back to my grandparents. "You need me," she said. "Neither of you understands these accounts anymore." My grandfather's face went still. My mother leaned closer. "If you listen to Jessica, I'll have both of you evaluated. Do you understand? I can prove you're not competent to manage your affairs." My grandmother looked frightened. That was the threat my mother had used behind closed doors. I reached into my bag and removed a small remote. The ballroom had a projection screen behind the head table. It had been prepared for the anniversary slideshow. Instead, I connected Malcolm's laptop. The first image appeared on the screen. It was a digital bank record obtained directly from the financial institution. Then another, and another. Every transfer was time-stamped. Every destination account was identified. Copies of signed authorizations appeared beside the corresponding transactions. My mother had destroyed paper. She could not destroy records stored on bank servers. Then I played the recordings. Rebecca had advised me that our state allowed a participant in a conversation to record it. My mother's voice filled the ballroom. "You are making this worse for yourself." Then another recording. "Your grandparents are elderly. Upsetting them unnecessarily could have consequences." Finally, a recording obtained by investigators during a monitored call between my mother and uncle. Joseph's voice said, "Once the new documents are signed, Jessica can't force an audit." My mother replied, "She won't get close enough to try." No one in the ballroom moved. My grandfather looked older than he had an hour earlier. My grandmother began to cry, not loudly. She simply covered her mouth and stared at her children as though she were mourning people who were still standing in front of her. The investigators arrested my mother and uncle that evening. The charges eventually included grand larceny, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, identity theft, and elder financial exploitation. The fake medical records added additional charges. The forged power of attorney connected Joseph directly to the jewelry. The joint account connected him to my mother. The offshore accounts connected both of them to the missing trust funds. Some of the money was recovered, not all of it. Several commercial properties had to be sold. My grandparents' lifestyle changed, but they kept their home. They kept enough to live securely. And for the first time in years, they controlled their own decisions. My grandfather reinstated me in the trust. I told him that was not necessary. He insisted. It was never only about money, he said. It was about knowing who would protect us when the money was gone. My relationship with my grandparents did not repair itself overnight. They had believed the worst about me. I had to accept that. They had also been manipulated by their own children, isolated through fear, and threatened with losing their independence. Healing required honesty from all of us. My grandmother apologized first. She held my hands at her kitchen table and said, "I should have asked you before I judged you." I told her the truth. "Yes, you should have." Then I hugged her. My mother later sent me a letter through her attorney. She did not apologize. She blamed Joseph. She blamed my grandparents. She blamed bad investments, unfair investigators, and me. She said I had humiliated her. That sentence told me she had learned nothing. She was not sorry she had stolen. She was sorry people had seen her do it. I never answered. The pawn receipt that started everything now sits in a sealed evidence file. Sometimes I think about how convincing it looked. My name, my address, my license number, my signature, every detail was accurate except the truth. That experience changed the way I understand evidence. A document can be forged. A signature can be copied. A medical record can be invented. A family member can cry while lying directly to your face. But lies become expensive to maintain. They require more documents, more explanations, more people, more transactions. Eventually, the numbers stop supporting the story. My mother believed she could destroy my reputation faster than I could uncover her scheme. She was almost right. She had the advantage of being believed first, but I had something she did not: patience. I followed every receipt, every account, every signature, every transfer. And when she tore the paper records apart in front of everyone, I showed her what accountants have always known. Paper can burn, screens can break, people can lie, but money leaves a trail. And sooner or later, that trail leads back to the person who thought no one would bother to follow it.